The wind came first. It swept across the open land in long, restless breaths, bending the tall grass into waves that shimmered beneath a fading orange sky. Out here, miles from any town or road, the world felt older, quieter, as if it had been waiting long before people ever tried to claim it. The Apache warrior stood at the edge of his land, still as stone. He had been there for nearly an hour, though time didn't matter much to him. His sharp eyes were fixed on the narrow trail cutting through the hills, watching for movement, waiting. He wasn't a man who waited often. His life had been shaped by instinct. Hunt, survive, protect. Words were unnecessary most days. Company, even less so. The land gave him everything he needed, and silence had become something close to comfort. But today, silence felt different. Today, it pressed against his chest. A distant sound broke through the wind, the creak of wooden wheels, slow and uneven. He stiffened. The wagon. It appeared gradually over the rise, pulled by a tired horse and guided by a trader who looked far too eager to leave. Dust followed behind them like a ghost, trailing their arrival into a place that didn't belong to outsiders. The warrior's jaw tightened. This had been his decision. Weeks ago, when the trader first approached him with the offer, he had almost walked away without listening. Marriage wasn't something he'd ever considered, not seriously, not in a world where survival demanded everything a man had. But the trader had insisted. A wife brings more than company, the man had said. A home needs a heartbeat. The words had lingered longer than they should have. And now, here she was. The wagon stopped a short distance away. The trader wasted no time climbing down, wiping sweat from his brow as if the land itself made him uneasy. "She's inside," he said quickly, gesturing toward the back. "Didn't cause trouble." The warrior said nothing. His gaze shifted to the covered wagon. The fabric curtain at the back stirred slightly in the wind, revealing nothing more than shadow. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. Each footfall was deliberate, measured, not from fear, but from something unfamiliar, something heavier, uncertainty. He reached the wagon and stopped just short of touching it. The silence between him and whatever waited inside stretched thin. Then, a small movement. The curtain shifted again, this time from within, and she stepped out. She was smaller than he expected, not fragile, but contained, like someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. Her dress was simple, travel-worn, the edges marked by dust and long miles. A loose strand of hair clung to her cheek, stirred gently by the wind. But it was her eyes that caught him. They lifted to meet his, not boldly, not fearfully either, but with a quiet kind of awareness, as if she were studying him the same way he was studying her, trying to understand. The warrior felt something tighten in his chest. He had faced enemies without hesitation, faced storms, hunger, loss. But this was different. He didn't know where to place his hands, so he let them fall at his sides. Didn't know what to say, so he said nothing at all. The trader cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well," he muttered, glancing between them, "that's that." He seemed eager to leave, climbing back onto the wagon almost immediately. Within moments, the wheels creaked again, turning away, carrying him back toward the distant world, leaving them alone. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence as before. Now it felt shared. The woman adjusted her grip on the small bag she carried. Her fingers tightened slightly, then relaxed. She started, her voice soft, almost lost to the wind. She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "I wasn't sure you would come." The warrior blinked. Her voice, gentle, uncertain, cut through him in a way he hadn't expected. He nodded once, a simple gesture, but it was the first acknowledgement he had given her. She noticed a faint shift in her expression, something between relief and hesitation. "I suppose," she continued quietly, "this is home now." The word home seemed to linger in the air between them. The warrior glanced back at the land, the open sky, the distant hills, the small cabin standing alone against the horizon. It had always been enough for him. But now, standing beside her, it felt unfinished. He looked at her again, really looked this time, at the way she held herself, careful, but not weak, at the way her eyes moved, taking in everything, searching for something steady to hold on to. She wasn't what he expected, and somehow, that unsettled him more than anything else. He turned slightly, gesturing toward the path that led to his cabin. An invitation. It wasn't much, but it was all he could offer. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she stepped forward to stand beside him. Not behind, not ahead, beside. And together, without another word, they began the walk toward a home neither of them fully understood yet. The wind followed quietly behind them, but this time it didn't feel so empty. The cabin sat farther up the slope than it looked from below. From a distance, it had seemed simple, just wood, stone, and time holding it together. But as they walked closer, the details became clearer. Hand-carved beams, reinforced walls, repairs layered over old damage. It wasn't built for comfort, it was built for survival. The Apache warrior walked slightly ahead, then stopped at the door. He hesitated. It was a small thing, barely a pause in motion, but for him it felt like standing at the edge of something unfamiliar. Behind him, the woman waited quietly. She didn't rush him, didn't speak. That silence of hers was different from his, less armored, more patient. Finally, he pushed the door open. The cabin welcomed them with the scent of smoke, dried wood, and solitude. Inside, everything was arranged with purpose. Weapons on one side, tools on another, a simple bed near the far wall. Nothing unnecessary, nothing personal. The woman stepped inside slowly, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. She didn't comment. That surprised him. Most people would have filled the silence by now, asked questions, judged the space, or tried to soften it with unnecessary words. But she just observed. That made him more aware of everything. He shut the door behind them. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Now they were truly alone. The warrior moved to the fire pit without thinking. Habit took over, striking flint, coaxing embers back to life. His hands were steady. Too steady. They always were when it came to tasks that didn't involve people. The fire caught slowly, spreading warm light across the room. Shadows shifted along the walls, and with them, the reality of what had just happened settled in. He had a wife, a thought that didn't belong in his life until now. He glanced at her briefly. She stood near the center of the room, still holding her small bag. Not clinging to it, not hiding behind it, just holding it like an anchor in unfamiliar water. "You can sit," he said finally. His voice sounded rough, unused. She nodded once and lowered herself onto the edge of a wooden bench. Careful, controlled. Another silence followed. It wasn't peaceful. It was uncertain. The fire crackled. Outside wind pressed against the cabin walls, testing them. Inside, neither of them knew what came next. The warrior shifted slightly, suddenly aware of how small the space felt. He had lived here alone for years, and it had never felt crowded. Now it did. Not because of her size, but because of her presence. She looked up at him. "Is this where you've always lived?" she asked softly. He paused, then nodded. Yes. One word, that was all he gave. But she didn't seem disappointed. Instead, she leaned back slightly, taking in the details again. "It's strong," she said after a moment. "It feels safe." Safe. The word struck something in him. He wasn't sure anyone had ever called his home that before. He turned away quickly, focusing too hard on adjusting the firewood. A defense mechanism more than a task. She noticed the shift, but didn't press it. That was what unsettled him most. Not her fear, not her questions, but her restraint. A woman alone in a stranger's home, yet she spoke like someone carefully building trust instead of demanding it. He didn't know how to respond to that, so he stayed quiet. Minutes passed. Then she spoke again, softer this time. "I don't want to be a burden." That made him stop. He looked at her fully now. A burden. The word didn't belong in this room, not with her in it. He frowned slightly as if trying to find the right response among thoughts he didn't often use. "You are not," he said finally. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't comforting in the way she might have expected. But it was honest. Her eyes lifted slightly at that. Something eased in her expression, just a little. The fire grew stronger, casting more light between them. For the first time, he noticed details he hadn't before. The way she sat, not slouched, not stiff, but balanced. The way her hands relaxed after hearing his words. The way she kept looking around, not out of fear, but understanding. She wasn't breaking. She was adapting. And that made something unfamiliar stir inside him again. Responsibility. Not the kind he knew from battle. Something quieter, heavier. He turned slightly away again, as if distance could organize his thoughts. "I don't know what you expect," he admitted suddenly. The words came out before he could stop them. It was the first real sentence he had given her. She looked at him carefully. Then, after a pause, she added, "Not yet. Not yet." Those two words lingered longer than they should have. He didn't understand them fully, but he felt their weight. Outside, the wind shifted direction. Inside, the fire steadied. And for the first time since she arrived, the silence between them didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them had learned how to name. Night settled over the land like a heavy blanket. The wind outside had calmed, but not disappeared. It moved in slow, uncertain breaths against the cabin walls, as if the world itself was listening. Inside, the fire had burned lower now, glowing amber instead of bright orange. Shadows softened, edges blurred. The space between them no longer felt sharp, but it still wasn't comfortable. The Apache warrior sat near the fire, cleaning a small blade he didn't really need to clean. It was something to do with his hands, something to keep his mind from circling too many thoughts at once. Across from him, she sat quietly on the wooden bench. She hadn't moved much since evening fell, but she also hadn't withdrawn. That was what kept catching his attention. Most people, he knew, filled silence quickly, either with noise or discomfort. But she didn't. She let it exist, let it breathe, like she understood that not everything needed to be spoken to be real. Still, he didn't look at her for long. Looking felt dangerous. Not because she was threatening, because she wasn't. The fire popped softly. She shifted slightly, breaking the long quiet. "I was thinking," she said. Her voice was gentle, careful. He paused his movement, but didn't look up. About what? There was a brief hesitation, like she was deciding how honest to be. "About us," she admitted. That made his hands still. Us. The word landed heavier than expected. She continued, before he could retreat into silence. "This arrangement, it didn't feel like a choice at first," she said softly. "Not really. But I don't think I want to treat it like something I just survive." He finally looked up. Her eyes met his immediately this time. No hesitation. No avoidance. Not bold. Just steady. That steadiness unsettled him more than fear ever could. She wasn't testing him. She was trying to understand him. The warrior set the blade down slowly. The fire between them flickered, casting moving patterns across her face. In that shifting light, She didn't look like a stranger anymore. But he wasn't ready to admit that. "You could leave," he said quietly. It wasn't a challenge. It was an option. A truth. He expected relief in her expression. Instead, she shook her head. "I don't want to," she said. Simple. Direct. Honest. The words hung in the air like something fragile but real. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, an owl called in the distance. Inside, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that the space between them no longer felt like a wall. He studied her now more openly. The way she held her hands loosely in her lap instead of gripping her dress. The way her shoulders had stopped tensing every time he moved. The way her gaze didn't drop immediately when he looked at her. She was still cautious, but she wasn't afraid of him in the way he had expected. That was unfamiliar. And unfamiliar things, he knew, could either become dangerous or important. "I don't know how this is supposed to work," he said finally. Less guarded, but still rough around the edges. She gave a faint, almost relieved breath, like she had been waiting for that honesty. "Neither do I," she admitted. That made something inside him ease, just slightly. Silence returned again, but this time it didn't feel like distance. It felt like pause, like both of them standing at the edge of the same unknown path, unsure of the first step. She leaned forward slightly, resting her hands on her knees. "I can learn," she added. He frowned faintly. "Learn what?" "Life here," she said. Then after a pause, quieter, "You." That last word stayed in the room longer than anything else had that night. He didn't respond immediately, because no one had ever said something like that to him before. Not like he was something that could be understood instead of endured. The fire crackled softly again. He looked away first, not because he was rejecting her words, but because he didn't know where to put them. "I am not easy to learn," he said at last, a hint of something almost like warning. But she didn't flinch. "I didn't say I needed easy," she replied. That made him stop again. Something in her tone, steady, unshaken, cut through the careful walls he'd built without him realizing it. He exhaled slowly. Outside, the wind shifted again, brushing against the cabin like a passing thought. Inside, the silence returned. But it was different now. Less like emptiness, more like recognition. She wasn't just someone placed into his life anymore. And he wasn't just a man she had been given to. They were still strangers, but for the first time, they were beginning to see each other clearly enough to become something else. The fire had nearly died down to glowing coals. What once filled the cabin with warmth now pulsed in soft red light, like a slow heartbeat fading into the night. Shadows stretched longer across the wooden walls, and the air grew quieter with every passing minute. Outside, the wind returned again, gentler this time, almost cautious, as if it too had learned the shape of the place. Inside, neither of them spoke for a long while. The Apache warrior sat with his back slightly turned toward her, though not fully. It was a habit, half awareness, half defense. Even in silence, he stayed alert, always listening, always ready. But tonight, there was nothing to prepare for, only her presence. She hadn't moved from the bench, yet somehow the space she occupied felt larger than it should have been. Not physically, but in awareness, in thought. In the strange way silence began to feel shared instead of separate. Then she spoke, softly. "Do you ever get tired of being alone?" The question didn't land like an attack. It landed like a hand resting gently on a locked door. He didn't answer right away. His fingers tightened slightly around the small piece of wood he had been carving without thinking. The blade stopped moving. Tired. It was a word he didn't often allow himself to consider, because tired meant something you could change, something you could admit. He wasn't used to admitting things. "I don't think about it," he said finally. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. She seemed to understand that. The silence returned, but it had shifted again, less rigid now, more fragile. She leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on her knees. "I used to think being alone meant being safe," she said quietly. "No expectations, no one to disappoint, no one to hurt you." He listened without turning. "But it doesn't stay safe forever," she added. That made him look at her again. Not quickly, not sharply, slowly. Like someone approaching a fire they weren't sure would burn them or warm them. Her eyes were fixed on the dying coals, not on him. That made it easier somehow. As if she was speaking into the space between them, rather than directly at him. "I learned that the hard way," she said. Something in her voice changed at that last sentence, just slightly. A soft fracture, quickly controlled. He noticed anyway. He always noticed things people tried not to show. The cabin creaked as the wind pressed against it. He shifted his posture slightly, turning more toward her now. "You were not safe before this place," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a quiet conclusion. She didn't deny it. "No," she admitted, "I wasn't." That honesty sat between them, without decoration. No excuses, no story yet. Just truth. He studied her more carefully now. There were things she didn't say, but didn't need to. The way her shoulders carried old tension. The way her hands relaxed only when she forced them to. The way her eyes sometimes looked like they were remembering something she didn't want to revisit. He understood wounds like that. Not the same kind, but enough to recognize the shape of them. "You do not speak of it," he said. "Not often." "Why?" She hesitated. For the first time that night, her gaze flickered toward him, just briefly. "Because when I do, people either try to fix me," she said softly, "or they stop seeing me." That sentence settled into the room heavier than anything before it. Fix her. Stop seeing her. Neither option sounded like care. The warrior frowned slightly, as if trying to understand something unfamiliar. "I am not good at fixing," he said after a moment. There was no apology in his voice, only fact. That made something shift in her expression, not relief exactly, but recognition. "I don't need fixing," she said quietly. A pause, then even softer. "I just needed to not be alone while I figure things out." The fire collapsed slightly, sending a small burst of sparks upward, before settling again into embers. He watched those sparks fade. Then, without fully deciding to, he spoke. "You are not alone." The words came out rough, unpolished, but real. She went still. Not shocked, not overwhelmed, just still, as if something inside her had paused to make sure it heard correctly. Slowly, she lifted her eyes toward him again. This time, she didn't look away. Neither did he. For a moment, the entire cabin seemed to narrow into that space between them. The fire, the walls, the night outside, all of it fading into background noise. Only awareness remained. She studied him, like she was trying to understand whether his words were habit or truth. Then she nodded once. "I believe you," she said. That was all. No dramatic shift. No sudden change in the world. Just trust offered carefully, like something still learning how to exist. The warrior felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest again. Not discomfort this time, but awareness of responsibility he had never named before. He looked away first. Not because he rejected her, because he didn't know how to hold that look yet. The fire finally settled into quiet embers, and in that low red glow, the distance between them didn't disappear, but it stopped growing. And for the first time since she arrived, it stayed the same. A shirtless, muscular Native American warrior with long, flowing black hair, strong, masculine features, tan skin, and traditional tribal jewelry made of beads, feathers, and leather, sits closely beside a beautiful young woman in an off-shoulder cream dress. They are seated together on a rustic wooden couch inside a cozy log cabin. The woman gently places her hand over his hand, creating a warm and intimate atmosphere. The warrior has a powerful athletic physique, broad shoulders, defined chest and arms, and a calm, protective expression. Warm, natural window light streams through the cabin, illuminating detailed skin textures and realistic facial features. Wooden log walls, soft blankets, cinematic depth of field, romantic countryside mood, ultra-realistic photography, photorealistic, highly detailed, 85mm lens, shallow depth of field, warm color grading, masterpiece, 8K HDR, professional portrait photography. The evening sky looked different now, not because the land had changed, but because they had. The sun dipped low over the hills, spilling warm orange light across the open fields. Shadows stretched long and familiar, no longer strange or threatening. The wind moved gently through the grass, no longer pressing against the cabin like an outsider. Inside, the cabin felt lived in. Not crowded, not empty, lived in. The Apache warrior sat near the doorway, repairing a broken strap from one of his tools. His movements were steady, but slower than before, not rushed by necessity, but guided by habit softened by time. Across the room, she was preparing a simple meal. It wasn't anything elaborate: bread, dried meat, water heated over the fire. But she handled it like it mattered, like small things were no longer meaningless. At first, they had divided space without speaking of it. Now, it had become natural. He worked, she cooked. Sometimes they traded tasks without discussion. Sometimes they simply existed in the same rhythm. Silence still came often, but it no longer felt like distance. It felt like understanding without words. A soft crackle came from the fire as she placed a pot down carefully. She glanced toward him. "You fixed that faster than I expected," she said. He didn't look up immediately. "It was not difficult," he replied. A pause, then, quieter, almost reluctant. "You are learning quickly." That made her smile faintly. "I have good reasons to learn," she said. He finally looked at her. There was something different in his gaze now. Not guarded in the same way, still reserved, still controlled, but warmer in a way that didn't need explanation. She noticed it, and didn't look away. That was new too. Outside, a distant bird called as the sky deepened into twilight. The cabin's firelight grew stronger, replacing daylight with something more intimate. She sat down across from him, not far, not close, just within reach of conversation if it came. For a while, neither spoke. Then she broke the silence gently. "Do you remember when I first arrived?" she asked. He nodded once. Yes. A simple answer, but it carried memory. She leaned back slightly, watching the fire. "I was so nervous," she admitted. "I kept thinking I'd made a mistake, that I wouldn't belong anywhere here." He listened without interrupting. "I thought you would be," she hesitated, searching for the word, "colder." That made him glance at her. "I am not warm," he said simply. She gave a small, quiet laugh. "No," she agreed. "But you're not what I expected either." That silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was reflective, like both of them were seeing the same past moment from a different distance. He set the strap aside. "I also did not know what you would be," he admitted. She raised an eyebrow slightly. And a pause. Then, "Honest, you are still here." But it meant more than the words carried on their own. Because in his world, people left, or broke, or became something you couldn't recognize anymore. She hadn't. Not yet. She nodded slowly, absorbing that. "I don't want to leave," she said again. Not like before, but firmer now. Not a statement of uncertainty. A choice. The fire popped softly. He looked at her for a long moment, then stood. Not abruptly, not with tension, just rising as if the moment called for it. She watched him carefully, unsure what he would do. He walked toward the doorway. The wind outside brushed in lightly, carrying the scent of earth and dusk. He stopped there, framed by fading light, and turned back to her. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, "This place is not easy," he said, "and I am not easy." She met his gaze without hesitation. "I know," she replied. Another pause. He stepped back inside. Slow, deliberate. Then in a voice lower than before, "Still, you did not leave." That wasn't a question anymore. It was recognition. She stood up slowly. "I chose not to," she corrected gently. Something shifted in him at that word. Chose. Not survived, not endured, not accepted. Chose. The space between them felt different now. Not uncertain, but defined. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. Not as approval, as understanding. The fire between them flickered, casting both their shadows onto the wall. Side by side this time, not separate. Outside, the night fully arrived. Inside, neither of them moved away. Not because they had solved everything, not because they suddenly understood everything, but because something had finally formed between them that didn't require explanation anymore. Trust, built slowly. Silence, shared instead of feared. And something softer underneath it all. The beginning of belonging.